everyone, Jane Craig here, Brand Swan. I just want to take a minute to welcome you and also thank our sponsor, Global Merchant Partners. They're a credit card processing company and they specialize in letting you keep more of your money, which is pretty cool. So without them, doing the video content would be almost impossible. It's quite time consuming. And as you know, we do this just to highlight the women in this community. We don't really get anything in return. So thank you so much for GMP for letting us continue to do this for the 7th annual year. So without further ado, let us go into the interview.
Today, we had the privilege of speaking with Cynthia Robinson, the pastor of Ark UCC. She's been nominated by former Delawarean Ann Green as a dedicated community leader, trusted advisor, and supporter for social justice. She is deeply involved in organizing events and marches that advocate for the dignity and rights of vulnerable and marginalized populations. We're excited to interview Cynthia about the difference she's making in the community. So Cynthia, the easy question, of course, is who are you, what do you do, and how did it all start?
All right, so I'm Cynthia Robinson. I'm originally from the South Shore area of Massachusetts, but I've lived in Ohio and Connecticut and now here in Delaware. So I went to seminary when I was, right out of college because there was some money from the government because my father was a veteran from the Air Force. And so there was money guaranteed for 5 years of education. If I wanted that 5th year, I had to go right into my field of choice, calling, go to graduate school so that I could get that 5th year of money. So I had felt the call to ministry since I was in high school, but I thought I was a little young to be figuring out, wow, that's a really big decision. And what if I change? What if my mind changes, my heart changes, my direction changes while I'm in college? So I waited until I got to college and I thought, yeah, I kind of still feel the same way, but 4 years of school, let's see what happens. And so I majored in psychology because that was an interest of mine. And I also thought, well, that would come in handy when, counseling and dealing with and ministering to people. And so by the end of college, I realized that, yes, I needed to go to seminary to do the kind of work that I wanted to do, because I was talking in my psychology internship, I was talking about, the importance of the spiritual life of a person, the importance of the whole person, and psychology at that point in 1987 wasn't really dealing with that. It was a kind of a wonky little line there. And so I realized, if I want to help people with their spiritual lives, that I was going to have to go to seminary. So I first thought that I was going to be a hospital chaplain. I thought that's what I would really like to do. But having been when I was in seminary, I had to serve in a local church as part of my degree program, and for at least a year. And after doing that for a year, realized and heard from other people, Cynthia, the church needs you. You are meant to be a pastor, to be settled in one place and to minister to a group of people over a long term, because you form relationships with people. That does happen sometimes in chaplaincy, but it's temporary. People move in and out of hospital fairly quickly. Usually, it's not a long-term relationship. So that was a key moment in my education, realizing that track was going to change. So. Graduated from seminary when I was 26, was ordained, moved to Ohio to start my first associate pastor position. That was the first position that I found, and worked in Ohio in the Dayton area for about 5 years. And what happened during those 5 years was I met my husband, got married, had our first child. And I had this, and I had this, and that was like at the end of the 5 years, really. I had this crazy idea that I was going to be able to breastfeed a baby and work part-time. I had negotiated with my church that I would return after my maternity leave. I would work part-time, but I would also breastfeed a baby. And during my maternity leave, discovered that was not going to work. That I found ministry and motherhood to be mutually incompatible in my life. I mean, I found them to be two equally strong callings. I mean, that these were people who needed me. These were relationships. And so decided that I don't want my child being raised by somebody else. I want to do that. And the church can always get another pastor, which is what ended up happening. So I left full-time ministry to stay home. I thought I would be home for like, I don't know, a few years. We were going to have another child at some point, and we did. We moved to Connecticut so that our kids could grow up with their grandparents, because both my husband's parents and my parents were in New England. But then my husband wanted to get another master's degree. So I
One
stayed
wasn't
home.
enough.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. He had both a bachelor's and a master's in physics, but he wanted to get a
Nice.
degree in electrical and computer engineering so he could
Wow.
perhaps make himself more marketable, could change, industry if possible. So I stayed home a little longer. And so what I started doing was temporary gigs. I would fill in for pastors when they went on sabbatical. I would fill in for them when they were ill or they were on vacation. I did a couple of interim pastorates where I filled in between settled pastors. I had one gig that was only like 10 or 11 weeks long because the interim pastor left, but the settled pastor was not yet due to arrive. And so they needed a pastor for 10 weeks. And so I filled in and did that.
Nice.
Yeah. So I did a lot of temporary stuff and served a lot of different churches in Connecticut. I think between preaching on Sundays, doing sabbatical, doing interims, I preached, I think, in 24 different churches. Which is phenomenal when you think about, usually you're just in one for like 10 years, you move on to another one or something. But so I got to know a lot of different folks, a lot of different parishes, really enjoyed that time. But as time went on, it was getting to be like, I really need to go back to work full time, because what was happening was I would work for a certain span of time. And like one of the interims was for 2 years. And so I would be away from the church where I was a member. I sang in the choir. I became involved in the church started an open and affirming task force to help the church move into becoming an open and affirming church to welcome and accept everybody, including gays, lesbians, transgender, bisexual people, everybody, to say that everybody is welcome at this church, and to make that our identity. And, started doing things like that in this local church. But then I get called out of that to go work in another church for 4 months, 3 months, 2 years. And then I'd come back and I'd feel like everybody had moved on with what they were doing and in their lives. And it got to be really hard to be yanked out of that, but then come back and then get yanked out of that. And so I turned to my husband and said, honey, I need to go back to work. I'm about ready to lose my mind. So because it's just becoming too much. So I'd been home for 14 years. We have two wonderful children. And so started a search process to find full-time work. And it took me 2 years because I was picky. I figured, if I'm going to uproot my family, if I'm going to find a place that I'm going to settle down with for a good 5 to 10 years, or 7 to 10 is a good length of time. I want this to be a place I want to raise my children. I want us all to be able to be happy. I want to find a church that I can work with. And I had made up my mind that I was only looking at churches that were open and affirming, because after going through that process with the church where I was a member, I discovered I did not have the patience to walk a church through that process, because in my mind, if you can't figure that out yet, then we got bigger fish to fry than to figure out whether or not we're going to welcome everybody. I mean, give me a break, So I had no patience for that. So I knew I wanted to find a church that was already open and affirming. And there are fewer of them in the United Church of Christ. There's about, I think we're up to like 1,700 congregations out of 5,000.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we're getting there, but still it's, and then then you're geographically limited because you're only looking in a certain area or whatever. And part of the reason I also wanted us to move out of Connecticut was where we lived in Connecticut was fairly affluent and fairly white. And I did not want my children growing up thinking that that's the way the world works. And that's the way the world is. I wanted them to be acquainted with the whole wide range of, that there's all kinds of people in this world, and that you have to live with them and work with them and make friends with them and make relationships and make connections. And that's the way the world really needs to work. So really pleased to find this church in Newark, Delaware that has solar panels on the roof, already open and affirming. A new church start that started in 1979. So they weren't, kind of like dyed in the wool Congregationalists like they are up in New England. And, they had started their own church culture, and really appreciated and still do being a part of this church. And it'll now be 10 years in October that I've been the pastor of this church. That's a long answer, but yeah, that's the whole.
You took your family to Delaware, and we're like a huge melting pot here, aren't we? So,
yes. And also what I've really appreciated is the ability to become politically involved. And you can know not just your state representatives, but you can know your senators and your representative. I mean, because the state is so small, everybody just kind of knows everybody. And I've really appreciated that. I mean, I live across the street from my state senator.
Yeah, I've rubbed elbows with them in networking events,
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Wow. So you've had quite the journey.
Yeah.
Knowing what you know now, like if you could go back to like your 18-year-old self when you were sort of struggling with, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? Do I really want to give my life over to God that soon? What piece of advice would you give yourself knowing what you know now?
Well, so I had an idea in my head as to how this was all going to go, and it didn't go that way at all. And I would not trade it for anything. I would do it the same all over again. So I guess I would tell my 18-year-old self, just take life as it comes. All right. Make plans, but don't dig them in too deep. Be flexible, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, be open to the experience that life has to offer, because sometimes I know that I can do this when I make plans, when I'm focused. There's this whole other world that's existing, outside of that perhaps there's something there that I need to pay attention to. There are people I need to make connections with. There are possibilities that I had not imagined. So it's always been, the whole path has always been about being open and being receptive.
Saying yes more often.
Well,
very cool.
Yes and no. I mean, because a yes implies a no. It means you're saying no to something else, right?
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's important to be mindful of that there are some things you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go over here and pay attention to this. So yeah, that's what
there is a whole aspect of, taking on too much, and it kind of forces you to say no to other opportunities that might be better, especially if you're big on commitment, and you don't want to go with your word, you don't want to go back on it. I can see that being, So during this whole process where you've been traveling a lot, I'm not sure what was the biggest pressure, the most stressful situation you've ever been in.
Oh boy. Yeah, there's been a few.
One moment.
Well, I mean, all right, I'll give a for instance. This isn't the most stressful, but a for instance. Fair. So one of the temporary positions I did before I did this full-time thing was a pastor was going on sabbatical, a colleague of mine, a woman, older than me. And she told me expressly, she said, because she and her congregation were going through a rough patch. And she said, they're going to try to get rid of me while I'm gone. While you are here, your job is to make sure that I still have one when I get back.
Oh man. Oh, that's pressure.
Yeah. And so there was a congregational meeting while she was gone. And in the midst of that meeting, one of the male leaders of the congregation, who's also a lawyer, and so I want you to imagine Connecticut, lawyer, white, probably about 60 years old or so. And he's tall, I'm 5'2", and he's telling me, well, this is what we want to do. And then I had to come back with, it's like, it says in your bylaws, in the bylaws, it is written how, if a church wants to dismiss their pastor, These are the steps that you have to take in order to do it. And I said, this isn't that. And then he called me, I was being shrill because my voice was shaking. And
Oh,
it
'cause
was
you're so
probably
nervous.
because it was rising in tone probably, but
Oh,
I had to
no.
hold my ground, even though, I was just so intimidated, and, they're trying to do this terrible thing to this person. It's like, look, you can wait a few weeks until she gets back, and then you guys can like go at it toe to toe, but that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to try to oust her before she got back, which is just so underhanded. So that was really tense. I mean, and so I don't know. I know people have all kinds of opinions about church people and about congregations, and some of them are true. But at the same time, there are also faithful people. That was one person, and maybe he had a few buddies, a few other cohort, people in his cohort who were kind of, actioning for that. But for the most part, everybody else was like, man, sit down, but you have to have somebody who can stand up and tell him to do that. And that's
awesome.
easy. That's a hard place to be.
How do you think how did she know that they were going to try to ditch her? There's going to be some politics involved, huh?
Yeah, I think so. And I think she'd heard rumblings. She had people who supported her, but who also had connections to the folks who were disgruntled or whatever. So, yeah, trust me, you kind of pick up on these things too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome you did that for them. I was like bullied a lot as a kid, so I have a natural tendency to also stand up for people, and I can really admire that about you.
Thank you.
So what's the most rewarding thing about what you do or what you've done?
Gosh, that I get to be a part of the most intimate places in people's lives. I mean, when they're at their most vulnerable, for one. So like when they're in the hospital, when they're ill, when they're not feeling well, when they're questioning something, when they're at a crossroads in their life and they want to talk something over and they call me. It's like, wow, that's amazing. That I get invited into their weddings. I get to be a part of that. That's oh God, that's one of the perks, let me tell you, is sometimes weddings can be, they can be a little stressful depending on the family or the couple or both or whatever. But for the most part, I have enjoyed them immensely. Just to be able to celebrate with two people who are in love with one another and want to bring together their family and their friends and say in front of God and everybody, this is the day, and this is when we're going to start our lives together. It's so humbling and so wonderful. And then, of course, funerals are one of the most painful times to be part of a person's life. But the fact that I get to be a part of that and bring something to that day that helps bring people together in a way where people feel safe to laugh and to cry, to have whatever emotions that they need to have on that day, and to honor the person that they miss, they've lost, that they're going to have to live the rest of their lives without now. That's also a very humble, meaningful moment to be a part of someone's life.
It sounds like one of the biggest challenges you face, is when so much, when there's someone you used to know.
Well, that's the other part of it too now, is that now that, because this is the first, like I said, this is the first congregation where I've been a part of their lives for 10 years. So, I mean, I love these people. And so when they die, I am grieving as much as they are. Well, maybe not as much, but I'm still grieving. And yet I have to lead them through that moment. But I really appreciate it in a way even more. It's like, because it's like we're all in the same boat, So, and every now and then we'll say to one another, oh, geez, I miss so-and-so. Yeah, me too. And have a moment to remember that person or whatever and what they meant to us. And so, yeah, made some good friends, let me tell you.
Well, I have two questions. Well, three actually, but the first one I'll ask is, so you've been fighting for, diversity and equity and inclusion in your churches, and is there another cause that you hope to see in the world? Is there another change that you think is coming that needs to be included in progressive?
So there are a few organizations that I also volunteer with. That's part of my call, that I'm encouraged to do that. So like I'm on the board of directors for Friendship House. I volunteered with Moms Demand Action. I volunteer with Planned Parenthood. There's a group of us that meet called Clergy for Choice, and we support the folks at the Wilmington Planned Parenthood office. Some of the folks in Clergy for Choice are also their volunteer client escorts. So they're outside the building and help people, from the parking lot into the building. So if there are folks out there protesting, they can help keep them safe and away from those voices. And I've also done some work with Compassion and Choices, which is about end-of-life options. And there's a bill right now active in the House in Delaware that's coming for a vote fairly soon. So to me, the whole, our church has participated in pride activities. So we're
Marches.
Marches, that kind of thing. Yeah. So
Thank you for that, by the way.
Oh, you're
That's
welcome.
huge, that you care.
My oldest is non-binary, and back in 2019, we went to the National Trans Visibility March down in DC and marched in that. And oh God, that was wonderful. Just to see this community from across the United States was fabulous.
How many do you think attended?
That's a really good question.
Like 100, 5,000? Give me a ballpark.
Oh gosh. Well, there was a ton of us. I would say probably somewhere near 5,000. Yeah.
Whoa, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was. I've been to the March for Our Lives, which was huge. Yeah. So, I wished I'd been able to go to the first Women's March down in DC, but wasn't able to do that. So we had one here in Newark, which was wonderful.
Yeah. Remember that one.
And every year we also at our church, we host, I have a good friend of mine is part of the, I think the founder, organizer of the Delaware Sikh Coalition. And so every year in April, we have a peace walk where we invite all kinds of folks, whoever wants to be a part of this, where we just walk down Main Street from Old College down to our church on Main Street and, carry a coexist flag and, just wave to people. It's like, hey, look at all of us. We're all different. We're all living in peace. We're all, we're all here together as a community. And then we end up at our church and different folks will speak. And now we've had, like Moms Demand Action. The founder is also part of Moms Demand Action. So we get some of those folks to come and speak. And so to me, it's all one of a piece. It's not like this issue over here and this issue over here. I work on all of these things because they all touch on one another. They all intersect with one another. And so I guess what I'm working toward and what I'm trying to hope our church is working toward is to help people understand that all of these issues interact with one another and they touch all our lives, not just, so if legislation is trying to ban healthcare for transgender individuals, like gender affirming healthcare, that affects your healthcare too, because if you receive hormone replacement therapy, that's gender affirming healthcare. We don't understand that I've always received gender affirming healthcare. We just don't call it that. But I've always been able to schedule appointments for whatever I need and as a woman. But a trans woman should be able to receive the same health care as trans man should be able to receive the same health care. A man who goes and gets Viagra is getting gender affirming health care, whether he realizes that or not. So, when we start limiting things for some people, it's going to affect all of us. And so I don't think that's what I try to work toward, is getting people to understand this kind of universality of the human experience. We each have our own individual experience of it, but when we limit one group of people, we limit all of us. When we liberate one group of people, we liberate all of us.
I think that's your legacy you'll be known for.
So. I hope so. Yeah. If I was going to say one thing I'd like to be remembered for, it would be that I tried to love people unconditionally, no matter who they are. That's the motto of the United Church of Christ. And this isn't the, I know I'm divulging some of your questions because I read them ahead.
No, it's okay. Please, this is a natural, conversation.
Okay. This
I've
isn't
also asked you questions that weren't on the list, so I cheated a little bit.
well, this isn't the quote I live by necessarily, but the United Church of Christ, the motto is, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. So that's kind of like what I'd
Beautiful.
like to be remembered by. But the quote that I live by is actually from author Octavia Butler, who was an Afrofuturist, a speculative fiction novelist, a genius in my opinion. But in one of her books, The Parable of the Sower, she wrote, "Kindness eases change." And that's what I try to live by, is that kindness eases change.
That's beautiful. I think a lot of people need to hear that right now.
Yeah. So
That's
that no
lovely.
matter, if you can't do anything, be kind. It doesn't cost you anything. Really doesn't.
Nope. Last question for you
Okay.
is, what's one question that you wish I asked you, but I didn't?
I was racking my brains about that. I looked at that and
What do you do in your free time, when you're not fighting for social justice?
Okay. Well, so sometimes I think part of my maybe where this all came from or comes from too is I love movies and stories, television shows with a good story, books with a good story, using my imagination. I like to do art, all different kinds of art. I'm not a one thing or another, and I don't do it enough, that's for sure.
I agree.
Yeah, but things
for myself, not for you.
Right? No, and I try not to produce anything that's terribly permanent because the world has enough stuff enough stuff in it, right? I don't need to produce any more stuff. But things that get me to use my imagination. And so like I love Star Trek. I was raised on that, so to speak. So the whole idea
I never could do the hand thing. I have love it.
I had measles when I was 7, and I had to sit in bed and I listened to Star Trek with a washcloth over my eyes, and I would sit there and hold my fingers so that I could do that. So that's why I am able to do that.
Chicken pox. All I got was a scar during my chicken pox. So
but the whole idea, the whole future thinking ideas of, one of these days, couldn't we live in a world without money? Where that's not or at least it's not the driving force in our life. It's not the accumulation of wealth, right? It's something else, that we work to better ourselves. Wouldn't that be amazing that would be the driving force in our lives, that, people of all different nationalities, backgrounds, whatever, could learn to live together in peace and work together for a common cause, that kind of thing. So that's any kind of story that gets you to think like that. I'm good for it. That's
for Star Trek, I had a huge crush on Wesley Crusher or Wheaton. Yeah.
Well, his character was Wesley. Yes,
of course. But the amazing thing about Star Trek was it was actually rather progressive as well. It brought in its first, Black female star, and it just, and women, and kept on going.
We had a Russian navigator, a Japanese helmsman, African-American communications officer, a Scottish engineer, and a Vulcan science. It was
some aliens.
It was great, and it just kept going from there. When you get into Next Generation and going beyond that, it just completely blew that out of the water. That of course we would have people from different planets, serving as Starfleet officers and Starfleet crew people. That was awesome.
There was a Star Trek Online game I definitely played. So definitely,
cool.
So, so Cynthia, tell us where we can find you online. Where'd you like to hang out?
I'm on Twitter.
Okay.
Probably more than I should be.
Fair.
Just scrolling. But so you can find me on Twitter at IrrevRant. So IRREVRANT. You can
we'll put a link below for everyone as well. So
so you can find me on Twitter there. I also have a blog. Still because I post my sermons on there for my congregations or anybody else who wants to read them. so that if they don't get to hear it or see it or whatever, they can read it. So that's irreverent. So, oh gosh, here, let's spell that.
Don't worry about it. We're going to have a link and they will get there, I
Okay, all right.
promise.
Well, it's
Rouse.
irreverent.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And then I'm on Facebook, just Cynthia Robinson, and there's probably
Perfect.
some numbers after that. Our Facebook page for the church is New Ark UCC on Facebook, and I'm also on Instagram at RevMom35. So
Awesome. Well, I'm
Yep.
definitely going to follow you. And thank you so much for your interview. Honestly, you're amazing.